Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful episode of true, scary stories to help you fall asleep. Today, we're going to be reading true, creepy backwoods horror stories. I hope you enjoy them. So without further ado, lay back, relax, and enjoy these true, scary stories. Since I saw someone asking for paranormal observations and experiences in Europe, I felt compelled to share what happened to me last year on a hike. As a disclaimer, I'm hiking a lot alone in the woods, and they're usually the place where I feel the safest and the most relaxed. This is why this particular hike was so unusual to me. I was already on my way back on a hike near the French border in Germany, and a sign announced a small spring 200 meters to the left that was used as a Christian pilgrimage spot, rebuilt after the grotto in Lourdes. I found a roebuck drinking from the water that ran naturally from a small grotto and sat there for a minute, since it was a very hot summer day. Using the cold water to refresh my neck and cheeks, I didn't drink any. Once I got up to hike the last bit of the track back to my car, something shifted in the woods, and I can only describe it as the instinctive feeling of immediate danger. I heard a sound, like a deep, deep voice talking in a strange language that seemed to come right from the trees. I started to walk faster. Suddenly, there were the sounds of hasty footsteps all around me, behind me, and in the trees above me, like a dozen small creatures chasing me. I could see movement in between the trees, but never enough to tell what it was. At this point, I was running, almost stumbling over the gnarled roots. After 5 minutes or so, the small water grotto wasn't visible anymore, and I heard a deep female voice say something calmly from left of the truck, behind a rock. It sounded like an ancient language, just a few words, and suddenly it stopped. The forest felt normal again. The birds started singing once more, and it was more peaceful. To this day, I have no explanation of what happened, only assumptions. Those Christian pilgrimage places were often built on top of old Celtic German places, so maybe it was some old magic trying to lure me away from the sacred place. Maybe it was just my imagination, a heat stroke. I have no idea. The hike was super beautiful and I'd love to do it again, but only the thought of returning to this particular part of the forest gives me goosebumps. There's been this kind of spooky story in my family about a guy who chops down trees at night. You can hear him in the woods. You can run towards him, but you can never catch up, and the sound will move like an axe slapping the trees around the same time every evening. The problem with this is that it's been going on for almost 80 years, and many family members have tried to locate the source of the sound. There for a while it had stopped, and then we brought it up and it began again. It has never stopped, but it's almost as if it manifests energy by talking about it. It's the woods off of Brownlee Road facing the Highway 28 side. No one has ever found chopped trees or fallen stumps or anything of the like, and the woods are a regular hiking and walking area. This confuses me. It is single chopping noises with slight interval pauses. Does anyone know what this could be? This is Abbeville, South Carolina. A few years back, I was driving down a country lane with my sister close to Christmas time in the UK. It was late at night and very cold. My car skidded around a corner and lost grip, sending us tumbling down a ditch and into a farmer's field. Initially, we were both okay. However, the car's bumper had come off and the wheel had flown off. We got out of the car and rang my boyfriend, who was at work and not answering. We stood in the field for some time waiting for him to finally see his phone. At some point, a nice normal lady pulled over who said that she could drive us to the village and ask her husband to come back with a tow rope. About an hour passed and there was no sign of the woman or her husband, and it was freezing cold. Then a lorry pulled up with two men speaking in Scouse accent, who said that they could pull the car out and help us. The lorry seemed well equipped, but everything in me told me not to let these men near us, even though we were stranded and freezing. So I declined their offer and they drove off. About 10 minutes later, they came back and said that they couldn't leave us there and really wanted to help. Yet I was still on edge and alarm bells were still ringing. So I declined again. However, they didn't listen this time and got out of their lorry walking towards us. The next thing I remember is a completely different man in a different vehicle putting a tow rope on my car and putting on the spare tire, making it drivable for the short distance to my boyfriend's workplace. This man was the husband of the previously mentioned woman. I had a bad pain in my shoulder, which was later diagnosed as a broken collarbone. However, I did not feel this until after I remember the man coming to help. This man said that his wife had told him to come help, and he had left straight away, which in no way could have taken the time that we had waited. We were very attentive to this time, as we were waiting for my boyfriend's break so that he would see his phone. Discussing it later on, my sister has no memory of these two Scouse men, and only remembers waiting a long time for the woman's husband to come. How has this happened? And why do I have no memory of what happened after they got out of their car? So 3 days ago, I was hiking at my hills, in which I have been hiking with my dad for years, and I know these forests really well. But 3 days ago, I went into the woods with my dad, and he wanted to leave. So I told him to feel free to do so, but I wanted to stay still. So I'd just keep practicing my bushcraft skills because I'm a huge fan of it, and ended up making a short bundle of bows and some primitive arrows, because that's my hobby, and it's what I do for fun. And all of a sudden I hear a tree around 30 to 40 feet away behind me start making a few snapping noises for a brief moment. I thought that it was a dude chopping it with an axe or sawing through it. So to learn what was going on, I climb on the most comfortable tree that I could find nearby and just stare at the direction of the tree making those snapping noises to see what was really going on. I ended up hugging onto the tree for about 3 minutes, and I saw nobody cutting any trees in that direction, which the snapping tree noises came from. So then I decided to calm down, and I assumed that it was nothing. And after going about my business and making short arrows for my bow, I hear a tree at around the same direction start snapping again. Now I panicked a little, because I'd never had this happen to me before. Usually, whenever I heard a tree making snapping noises, a guy would be there with a large saw or an axe chopping it. But there was no one else at that 30 to 40 feet away direction of the sound. So I decided to keep an eye in that direction, whilst moving on with my arrows. And after a while, I see a tree at that same direction which I had heard snapping tree noises, or branch breaking noises, whatever you want to call them. I see the tree falling down to the ground. Immediately my hair stands up throughout my whole body. I try staring at the direction with fear, expecting something to pop out. And so immediately I climb back on the same tree to see what was going on, or if someone cut the tree to retrieve wood from it. But there was nothing at all. What I forgot to almost mention here is while I saw the tree fall, I saw it shaking at first as if someone was purposefully shaking it, and it fell to the ground as a result. I climbed and I saw the roots of the fallen tree 30 to 40 footsteps away, and no cut marks from any saw or chainsaw, which I would have heard if someone was using a chainsaw. There were also no axe cut marks, literally nothing besides the root of the tree, as if it fell on its own. And honestly, it might have, but there was no wind for it to shake from one direction to the other before falling. It was literally out of a horror sci-fi movie scene. I'd never expect to see something as if a giant had just pushed the whole tree, making it violently shake, and then fall down. But again, no one was there when I looked from the tree, so it might have just been a random tree falling on its own. But for it to shake with no wind at all, and for no one to be there is a pretty huge coincidence from my perspective. But hey, I'm not going to be in denial of the options that this might be just a random occurrence. It's just very odd and rare for it to happen, at least in my opinion. I wonder what y'all think, or if anyone has any explanations. I'm open to hear some plausible explanations about this encounter. There is a strange old energy throughout the Georgia Piedmont in the foothills of the Appalachians. The geography of the area, that which has not yet been consumed by Atlanta's limitless growth, can be characterized by dense forests, rolling hills, and shallow red clay valleys, punctuated by small grassy meadows. Silty rivers and small streams crisscross the landscape, often filling up the valleys to form lakes and marshes. You are never alone in these forests, which are densely populated with wildlife of all strata. The region also hosts a large human presence, with booming sunbelt suburbs sprawling endlessly into the ancient hills. As there are so many people in a relatively small region, it can feel difficult to escape the hustle and bustle of it all. Well-known trails close to population centers are often crowded, especially on fall weekends when the plentiful trees bloom with autumn color. I've been around long enough to know what hikes to avoid at certain times of year, as solitude is one of the most enticing benefits of wilderness to me. Plenty of state and natural forests, as well as expansive county nature preserves, go relatively unnoticed if they're not among the top search results on all trails. My Labrador puppy loves to accompany me on any hike. After work one day, I loaded him into the cab of my tired old pickup and drove us out to a close-by nature preserve that we frequent. The small gravel parking lot was totally empty when we arrived. The trail that we took led straight from the parking lot and was one of the most popular. It was midsummer, and I knew that there would be at least 90 minutes before sunset. But under the tree cover, the landscape was already beginning to darken. As we got on our way, the roar of cicadas immediately drowned out the soft percussion of our footsteps. After crossing a whitewater creek, and proceeding through a thicket of tall pines for not more than 2 miles, the view suddenly opens up to an expansive untamed meadow. Markings on trees along the right-hand side clearly indicate where the trail resumes on the opposite corner, several hundred yards away. The majority of the meadow slopes down gradually to the left, dotted with occasional dogwoods, and is sliced off sharply by another wall of old-growth pines before the bottom of the hill. Although I was familiar with the trail, I suddenly found us cutting swiftly leftward through the tall grass and down the hill toward the grove at the bottom of the meadow. Both my pup and I were drawn with urgency to this off-trail area of the preserve, and soon enough we were at the trees and taking our first steps into the dim woods. Through the branches ahead I could see a crumbling red brick chimney, standing alone in the brush. It did not appear to be far away, but as we continued to advance toward it for several minutes, it seemed that we weren't getting any closer. Suddenly, a large black snake stopped us in our tracks, positioning itself as if to block us, and staring with a raised head. This is highly unusual behavior for black snakes, which are normally furtive and keep away from people. This slight shock snapped me out of my almost trance-like state, and suddenly everything felt very wrong. I took it as a sign that we were not welcome in that part of the forest, and no longer wanted to investigate the chimney. It took much longer than I expected to get back into the meadow. At this point, I was drenched in sweat, and my pup was panting hard, whereas not long ago we were enjoying the relatively cool summer evening. The meadow too was now dark, and when I checked my watch, I saw that we had been off trail for nearly an hour. Everything was silent, no more cicada chirping. I've had similar encounters throughout the region, where the laws of space and time seem to be somehow suspended in certain areas of the backwoods. I've considered looking for the chimney again, when I'm sure to have more daylight. But then I think about the snake's warning, and the feeling of existential dread that I felt that evening. Perhaps some things aren't meant to be investigated. Many years ago, my nephew and I went for a camping and fishing trip out to Cumberland, Maryland. There is a state campground that is located on the Potomac River. The sites are dispersed for the most part, and not many people were camping. We drove to the end of the campground to the last campsite, far away from the other campers. We set up camp and everything was normal. It was quiet, with the exception of normal sounds in the forest. Then, at around 10 or 11 at night, we heard the sound of a woman singing in the woods. Not a song that you could recognize. It was more of a melody without words. I heard it, my nephew heard it, and my dog heard it. My dog was laying down by the fire and jumps up and starts staring into the woods. I look at my nephew and he looks freaked out. I asked him if he heard the woman singing, and he says, "I don't hear anything. I'm going to bed." Which is total crap because he's about 10 feet away from me and it was pretty loud. It sounded as if it was coming in from one direction, but no direction in particular. I've read about disembodied voices, and maybe that's what we heard. It sounded like someone maybe 20 to 30 feet away. It wasn't scary or ominous, but it was a little unsettling. I told my nephew that we should walk around and see what it was, but he wasn't interested. After a few minutes, it stopped. I can say for sure that nobody was hiding in the woods. I've camped with my dog for years, and he was very alert to things moving around in the woods. He would have made it known to someone that they weren't welcome. It was strange that he didn't bark or growl. He just stood up and stared into the woods just like I did. I tried to find info online about similar experiences, but didn't come up with anything. It was a strange experience for sure. Also, for some more info, I looked on a map and found that it was Green Ridge State Forest. I think it was campsite number 66. It's at the end of a dirt road down near the river. As I'm sure some of you are aware, the hunting season for white-tailed deer is about to start this weekend. I'm a 25-year-old female, and I've been spending a decent chunk of time in the stand with my partner, in life and in most ventures generally, because we've discovered that hogs have been rooting up the oats and generally causing havoc and scaring away the deer from the feeder. We've gone out a handful of times in the last 2 weeks, attempting to catch the miscreants at it. So far, no luck. Very frustrating. At any rate, because of the hogs, I've been spending more time in a stand, after dark, than I ever have in my life. We've been up there from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m., 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., 9 p.m. to 11 p.m., and every other weird time slot you can think of. I mention this just in case it's relevant or helps paint a picture. There have been a few things that have happened that I've struggled to explain away or rationalize, and my partner is out of ideas too. The first thing happened about a week and a half or 2 weeks ago. It was around 1 or 2 in the morning, with a decent chunk of moon illuminating the area. I was only half paying attention to my surroundings, because I'd already written the night off as a bust, when all of a sudden I become aware of a weird whirring or flapping sound. I thought it originated from somewhat behind me, but my partner said he heard it coming from away and to the front left of us. At any rate, it was loud, airborne, and passed quickly over us and away. I am very familiar with the sound drones make, and this wasn't it. It also wasn't a helicopter. The sound was too small, if that makes sense. And it wasn't a bird, it sounded too mechanical. It was flying very low, probably just above the tree line. We couldn't see anything. The second thing happened about a week ago. We weren't in the stand, but it was weird and out of the norm, so I'll mention it. We live on the same property that the stand is on. It was around 9 or 10 at night when all of a sudden there was a distant boom, like an explosion, which hit our home like a thud. If you've ever spent any time around heavy artillery or explosives, you'll know what I mean. It was strong enough that my sister-in-law, who lives down the road, called us asking what the heck had just happened. It could have been a natural gas explosion, but the weird part is that my partner did some internet digging, and a local emergency management website had posted asking for any info on an unknown explosion, back in 2016, during the same time of year. We still have no clue what it was. And then lastly, tonight, we were out in the stand once again. It's gotten cold, and we've had a ton of rain all day, so everything was damp and dripping. We went out at 10 and it was about 10:30. I was preoccupied with trying to keep my fingers and toes warm, when suddenly I become aware of a weird murmuring. My partner heard it too, but he has hearing damage, so I don't think he heard the full breadth of the tones. To me, kind of sounded like muffled voices off in the distance, like someone's having a conversation too far off to make out the individual words. But the direction the sounds were coming from doesn't have any buildings or dwellings. It's just woods. And there were several different tones. My partner said it kind of sounded like a cow moaning, but not quite. There are cattle in the area, and we hear them vocalizing all the time. This wasn't that. And there isn't any grazing land in the vicinity of the sound's origins. They carried on for maybe 30 seconds, slightly rose in a crescendo, and then died off and faded away completely. I want to stress how indistinct these sounds were. All of this, coupled with the general gut feeling I have whenever I'm out in the dark alone, has me wondering. I don't necessarily feel endangered, just generally watched and noticed. I have very good instincts, and I try to listen to them. I'd love to know what y'all think. There may be rational explanations for all these phenomenon. All I know is, I don't want to be another hunter with another creepy story. But I feel like I'm starting to see a bell curve emerge. Thanks for reading. I'd like to add that I'm not a noob in the woods. I've spent most of my life outside. I grew up camping and hiking during almost all times of the year. Sleeping on the ground in a tent, you get used to hearing nature moving around at night. I spent 6 years during active military, so I've been exposed to some military-grade technology and what that might look and sound like. Obviously, there's top-secret stuff that hardly anyone sees, but still. I've also worked during all hours of the day and night, always outside. This is the first time in my life, aside from a one-off experience that I had at a camp growing up, that anything out of the ordinary has happened when I've been outside to hear it. In fact, I've always joked that I might be some kind of deterrent to paranormal activity, because nothing ever happens when I'm around. More than likely, there are rational, ordinary explanations for the sounds that we've heard. But I also trust my gut, and if something feels hinky, it usually is. (2020) summer, about 10 a.m., upstate NY and mountains, was walking in the woods on a mountain near me. There is about 2 to 3 acres of trails to walk open to the public through a land trust. But if you break off it a bit, you can get to this old stone road. Not supposed to, but again, deep woods. Who's gonna stop me? The old road is either an old mining road or an old railroad that was ripped up. No tracks, but quite a few iron spikes. I had cleared the land trust trails that you are allowed to walk on, skipped through some highly dense woods to get to the sandy-type stone road. Sometimes you see others on this trail. I'd say of the 50 or so trips I took out there, I've seen people on that road 3 times. Once a group of joggers, like myself, twice ATVs. When I entered the trail, nothing seemed off. I began walking down the trail. The stone trail, not the public one. Everything seemed fine. It was just a bit more noisy than usual, but a noise I've never heard before. It was a noise I can't actually describe that well. The best description I can come up with is that it sounded like a machine mimicking an animal, but not just one animal, like it was trying to mimic a bunch all at once. It was mimicking the bees, the birds, everything, but very poorly. You couldn't listen to one sound and say, this is that animal. It was as if it was all sounds all at once, but a mimic of those sounds. There was an aspect to the sound that just wasn't right. It's so hard to explain, but do you remember those videos with AI voices that flooded YouTube? They don't sound human, but they are definitely speaking English. That's what these sounds were. They clearly weren't the actual animal, but were speaking like them. At first, it was at the decibel of a slightly talkative restaurant. Not so loud that you really notice. In fact, I didn't really notice at first. Then it started getting louder. About 100 to 300 meters down the road is when I first truly noticed it and got goosebumps. But I'm a dude, and I'm not superstitious, so I kept going. A really dumb dude, because I didn't bring any mace or weapon, and that area has both bears and mountain lions. It began to get louder. It went from the sound level of people talking quietly in a restaurant to a noisy, busy restaurant, but making those mechanical animal sounds, not people speaking. At this point, I actually stop walking and look around. The hairs all over my body stand up. You know the feeling, the one that's way past goosebumps, the feeling you get as a child when you just know there is something you can't see in the closet, the kind that makes you want to cover your head with the blanket and tuck your feet so the monsters can't grab them. Well, because it was a feeling I got as a child, I said to myself, "You're being paranoid." But I stopped and turned around to make sure nobody was behind me. I see something black and fuzzy about 20 feet behind me laying in the grass. It was a baby cat, probably bobcat, but can't be sure. Got close enough to see it was a kitten before it ran off. I see it, acknowledge it, and then turn back around and keep heading deeper into the woods. Now though, every single step I take, the sound is getting louder. And not only that, but now it's as if it's all around me. I got an intense feeling of being watched. Not by a baby bobcat. No, this felt like I was being hunted. Like something was watching me with evil eyes. This is going to sound absolutely insane, but I kept getting this image of a Native American man flashing in my mind. I kept looking into the woods expecting to see him watching me. Not as they exist now. No. The flash in my mind was as if it was one from a very long time ago. You know, now that I actually think about it, and I've only just put two and two together, there is some sort of memorial up there for a group of Indians, but it's all the way back on the area you're allowed to walk. The land trust section. Not where I was, and anyway. I got the feeling this Indian was watching me. He wasn't mad at me, he wasn't happy with me. He wasn't feeling any type of way about me. I kept getting the feeling that he was watching me intently. Despite this, I kept going. I said to myself, "You're being crazy. There is nobody there." Very shortly after this, like maybe 10 more steps and I couldn't go on, I had to turn back. My entire body was shaking and I was scared in the way a man gets scared. I didn't scream, I didn't run, I just said, "Okay, I'm leaving." The sounds persisted the entire way back, but on the way back I see a branch 5, 6 feet long, laying across the road I just came from. This branch wasn't there when I first went down the trail. I second-guessed myself. Did I miss my exit back to the land trust and travel too far in the other direction? No, can't be. I know exactly where I am on this road, and I'm not at my exit yet. I go up to the branch while looking around. At this point, I'm convinced someone has been watching me and following me. I get to the branch, and right next to it is a giant paw print. Not bear, not dog. I'm fairly certain it was an adult bobcat paw print. which, considering I just saw a baby kitten, makes a lot of sense. I pick up the stick. It's now my only weapon until I get out of here. So I keep walking back towards where I need to be, to exit this stone path and enter the woods to get back to the public trails. I get there, and the entire time I still feel like I'm being watched. I still feel this Indian present watching me. In my head, he was all black, but I knew he was an Indian because of his headdress. Again, this was flashing in my head over and over. As soon as I step into the woods a few feet, the mechanical sounds stop, and I go back to only having goosebumps. As I'm walking through the woods, though, something drops right next to me. Loudly, and at the same time something swoops past my head. It was an owl. It tried dropping something near me. I have no idea what was dropped. It then went and sat on a tree branch and just stared at me. I got out of there and haven't been back since. Of note, there is no cell service out there. I don't think it's relevant, but it should be noted probably. I have no idea at all what the sound was, no idea why I felt so creeped out, nor why I was getting flashes of an Indian man in my mind's eye, as the sounds got louder and began to surround me. The owl at 10 a.m. is a mystery. No idea why an owl is awake at that time. I thought they were nocturnal, and I have no idea why it tried to drop something on me exactly at the moment. The sound stopped as I entered the woods again, off the old dirt and stone road. The Indian, the owl, the bobcat, none of these things made me think I should turn around. It was that sound that did it. It hit me in an instinctual place. I felt like I was being watched and in danger, almost like this thing was closing in on me. I don't advise anyone to go looking, but not because of this experience. There is a very bad dude that lives nearby. He's caretaker to the land trust, and he tried luring me into his home one day. That's a completely different story, but that's why I'm not giving the location. Dude was a serial killer, and he even had that charm, where you know it's a bad idea. But everything in my brain said, oh yeah, perfectly reasonable to go with this man into his home that I don't know. What really gave away this guy's intention was when the original lure didn't work, and I began looking around his property behind him at all the cars with different license plates. He tried using a different lure to get me inside. When I didn't respond, he got this confused look in his eyes and began trying even harder. His issue is that I'm antisocial and on the spectrum, and had read about psychopaths and their charm. The second I felt like it was a good idea, like a fly to a light, I snapped out of it because I recognized what it was. I don't have proof that he was going to do it, but the circumstantial evidence is there. So even if you do perchance discover the land trust I'm discussing, at the very least, stay away from the old man in the home to the left. If you are at the right land trust, you'll know which. The home that has a bunch of cars under a group of trees with the license plates still on them from different states, and art in the yard. To the left of the entrance at the end of the road, you take to get to the land trust. All of the above is true. If you want to dismiss it, fine. But actually, what I'm really looking for is answers about that mechanical animal sound. I don't think the rest matters unless one of you goes out there. And in that case, I'm being sincere with you. Stay away from the old man, unless he's dead. Then you're good to go. So I've been sitting on this experience a while. I guess just not wanting to make a big deal out of nothing. But after reading some of the stories here and on other related subs, I would really like an answer to what I experienced. Back in about March of this year, I went camping with a friend, my boyfriend, and 3 dogs. My friend slept in his tent with his dog, and I slept in my tent with my 2 dogs and my boyfriend. My friend's tent was about 30 feet away from ours, and we were camping in the North Georgia mountains off an old Forest Service road. We were right next to a creek. For context, I'm an experienced backpacker, and am familiar with the usual nighttime sounds, like rustling in the leaves, sticks breaking, cicadas, etc. I have a lot of experience camping by myself, so it's rare that I get spooked out by anything other than other humans nearby, as I'm aware of the dangers of traveling solo as a woman. However, this particular night, I wake up in the middle of the night with a sense of absolute dread I've never felt before. I check my phone, and it's about 3:30 to 4 a.m. I really had to use the bathroom, and was debating on whether I wanted to try to put my hiking boots on and venture outside to go, or just try and hold it until daylight. I didn't want to wake up the dogs, because if they heard me putting on my boots, they'd likely want to go outside to go to the bathroom as well. I'm still in the tent. That's when I notice it. It's almost like a hum, but not in the pleasant way where it's a tune or anything like that. It's a low-pitched hum that was reverberating throughout the campsite forest and through my body. It had two tones. It started with a relatively higher pitch and would switch to the relatively lower pitch after a period of time. Then it would start over without a break in the sound at all. It wasn't soft either. It felt like it was covering the entire wooded area we were in. It didn't sound like an animal, a person, a machine, or anything that I've ever heard. At this point, I absolutely cannot hold off on a bathroom trip any longer. I quickly put on my hiking boots and quietly tell the dogs to stay put. My boyfriend is still sleeping. I unzip the tent and go outside. I couldn't see a thing. The two-tone humming then got louder. I do my business maybe 5 feet from my tent. Sorry, but there's no way I was venturing any farther than that. And quickly, nope, the heck back into my tent, and bury myself into my sleeping bag with a sweatshirt over my head to try and drown out, ignore the humming. The dogs raise their heads and growl a few times throughout this experience, but that isn't unusual for them when camping. I never saw any figures or lights in the woods, but I also was not looking for them and was trying to ignore the entire experience. Does anyone know what this humming could have been? The urban legend that I have is one that I live down the street from. I live down the street from Pheasant Hills Park in Dyer, Indiana, and there's a school which is right next to the woods, which I refuse to go into at night because of what I saw and heard in there. I've walked those woods for years, and I have had the feeling of being watched before, so I've started to spread the word. The story that I have heard is that in the early 1900s, before the school and railroad tracks were built, the town was farmland and stuff. So there was a guy who lived in those woods in a cabin. He worked as a lumberjack in town also. Years later, when the tracks were built, they originally ran through the woods right behind his house. One day when he was cutting down trees, a train was coming and he accidentally got hit and killed by it. Years later, starting probably in the 60s or 70s, there were kids who claimed that they went looking for him because they claim every Halloween night, on the anniversary of the incident, if you go into the woods in the wee hours of the night, you might encounter him. I don't know if this is true, but this is what I've heard. So about 3 years ago, I decided to see for myself, and I refused to go in there at night ever again. You'll get the feeling of being watched. You'll hear things or see things also, like some Blair Witch stuff. So if anyone wants to test the legend in the modern era, I'd like to know your personal experiences. But I highly recommend doing what I did to get the best results. Back in the mid to late 80s, my parents were driving north on a pitch-black highway in the middle of the night, and out of nowhere, a ghost car filled with teenagers screaming drove right into them. They both witnessed it, and said that it was the weirdest encounter they had ever experienced. Does anyone know of a highway near Ellie that is haunted with a ghost car? I'm assuming these kids were partying, not wearing seatbelts, and had a head-on collision. If anyone knows anything, please share. This happened back in 2021. My husband and 3 kids love us some primitive camping, and Loyalstock is the closest state forest that allows it. My husband and the dog left an hour before us, and he picked this site a bit off the trail. When we get there, he basically had set up camp. But my oldest, who was 12 at the time, and myself had a real uneasy feeling. We pushed through and were enjoying our day together regardless. My son and I had to walk back to the car for something which was maybe a quarter mile from our site. Straight line. No way we could miss it. But as we walked, we realized nothing was familiar, and that unsettling feeling crept back in. Soon we came to a paved road which shouldn't have been there. I even checked the map I had. The unsettling feeling just got worse. I wanted to keep walking because the car had to be there, but my son actually broke into tears begging to turn around, so we did. And walking the same line back, we were back at camp. And when I set off again to the car, walking the same path I had, I found the car. The rest of the afternoon, something felt off, and I noticed that there were no bird sounds, no wind. It was just silent. I had such a bad feeling that I wasn't able to settle down and begged everyone to go to bed before nightfall. I hardly slept that night due to the uneasy feeling and the deafening silence. But around 3:30 in the morning, I heard what sounded like mechanical whirling outside, maybe like a drone, but it was loud, like it was right beside our tent. As soon as I went to get up and wake my husband, it just stopped and the silence was back. It didn't wake anyone but my son and I, and by morning we were ready to pack up and go to another site. At the next site, it was the typical forest, birds and insects, and it felt just fine. Also, I should note that my dog was an anxious mess the whole time we were at the first camp. He kept pacing and looking around and whimpering. Something was definitely up there. So I was recently telling my boyfriend about a really strange experience I had in the summer of probably 2015. I'm as confused about it today as I was right after it happened. Over the years, I've spent countless hours Googling and reading, trying to find any sort of explanation or similar story, but I never have. Anyways, he was equally as intrigued and encouraged me to post about it here. I'll try to explain as best as I can. This happened in the lower mainland area of British Columbia. The area is pretty densely forested with the exception of some walking trails. They're fairly popular, but not popular enough that someone else would be there at the same time as you. No cell phone service either. Anyways, an old boyfriend and I were the only ones there this day, and we had made it probably 5 minutes down the trail when we heard this obnoxiously loud echoing mechanical noise in the distance. It's usually very quiet out there, with the exception of birds and the wind in the trees, so we stopped immediately to listen. It got louder and closer really fast. It's so difficult to describe what this noise was like. Extremely loud, like loudspeaker loud. It sounded like it was trying to mimic the sound of a bird squawking, or some Jurassic Park dinosaurs or something, but it was too robotic and mechanical sounding to be anything living. Then this glowing red thing shot out of the tops of the trees, and by this time the sound was deafening. The color reminded me of a glowing red stoplight. It was about the size of a hand, but kind of triangle-shaped. No wings or any other markings or features. It was darting back and forth from the treetops, landing on branch tips, then flying across to other trees with such speed and precision, I couldn't keep my eye on it. Then it started dive-bombing my face, coming so close it almost hits me, then flying back up into the tops of the trees, then back down at my head within literal split seconds. A second and maybe third one of these things came out of the trees and all started doing the same thing. It was hard to tell how many because of how loud and echoey the noises they made were. I could feel how close they were to touching me. My hair was literally being whipped around by how fast they were. It all felt extremely aggressive. My boyfriend had run back down the trail, and had apparently been screaming at me to run the entire time, but I hadn't even noticed or heard. After about 30 seconds of this attack, they all flew straight up into the sky and away into the trees. I could hear them in the distance for a bit, then never again. We waited there for hours, phones out ready to record, waiting for them to come back, but they never did. I've returned a handful of times since then, waiting in that same spot, but they've never returned. Does anyone have any idea what these things could have been? Thanks for reading. So for some background info, me and a couple of buddies went fishing. We hit a couple of spots that we hadn't been to before, and we didn't catch anything. So we went out to our typical spot, and it's basically in the middle of nowhere. It's a small creek that connects to the Kentucky River, and we're out there for about an hour. Nothing weird going on and no sense of fear. Then suddenly we hear this screeching noise. And no, not like someone yelling in the distance. Imagine a giant mosquito, and I thought that there was just a bug near me. But then my buddy sitting in a car 40 feet away also heard it. So whatever it was loud enough to cover that sort of distance. A few seconds later, a weird, almost banging noise like something big and metal falling. And for instance, we are in the middle of absolutely nowhere, so I'm just super tripped out. We instantly realized we needed to leave. I've been trying to find a story that relates to this, but no one seems to have heard a noise like that I could find anyways. This happened at around midnight. Hi everyone. Myself and 5 friends were relaxing and chatting around a fire last night on a property of a friend in Nashua, New Hampshire. Their place is located high up in a hill, and the property is backed by miles of wooded area before it hits a school. For reference, it's about 12:30 a.m., and the 6 of us are outside with my friend's 2 dogs. Their ears are on a constant swivel, and we're all wondering what they could hear that we couldn't. We were actually discussing all kinds of the crazy noises they have heard out there. Birds, owls, cats, coyotes, etc. My boyfriend started telling a story when out of nowhere, we hear what I can really only describe as a high-frequency pitched noise right above our heads to the right. We all stopped talking and fell into a sort of frozen silence, dogs included, while the sound seemed to move from the right above us to the left of us and completely fade out. The noise lasted maybe 7 to 10 seconds. We all snapped back to reality and were like, what the heck was that? We all heard it. We all froze. Myself and my friend, who is also a female, felt almost tingly and a little lightheaded for a few moments after we heard the noise. Theories and conspiracies followed as we sat around the fire and tried to joke about the eerie, freaky noise. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that I got, and we all went home shortly thereafter. Does anyone have any insight? I've already deep dived into owl noises and birds, and nothing aligns with what we heard that night. I'm in northern Quebec. I came for a cousin's reunion, and for background, we're native. My father has a trailer on some land not that far into the woods that he is remodeling. And because I live a good 3 hours away, we decided to stay the night. My father, myself, and my daughter, my dogs and husband, were at home for work. My daughter is having a really hard time sleeping due to a stuffy nose that's keeping me up also. So about a half an hour ago, 2:20 a.m. my time, I went out for a smoke. I'm sitting on the step at the door and hear a kitten call. Like an actual kitten call, nothing weird sounding. But by instinct I tell it no, you can't come and to go find your mom. Not even a minute later I hear some really weird sounding cat calls. They sounded imitated and threatening. I take my time to finish my smoke to show whatever is out there that I'm not scared. But really I am, especially that my 12-year-old kid is here. I make sure that I tell it again to leave, and it can't follow me before I come back in. I'm laying down with the window on top, open to let the breeze in, and all of a sudden this awful stink rushes in my nose. It's like opening a week-old garbage bag that's been left out in the sun. There's no weird sounds, just the smell. I've been smelling it for a good 20 to 25 minutes now. I want to add that we're not on native land, but not far. We're not deep in the woods, but certainly in a town surrounded by trees and freshwater lakes. I've smelled a bear. I've seen bears. My dad is a hunter, and he's killed a bear. And I don't remember it smelling like this. So I'm asking you guys what you think. I've seen a Sasquatch before, but in British Columbia, and we're 5 days away from British Columbia. But I have never smelled one. Any thoughts or ideas are welcome. And P.S. I'm on alert, but I'm not scared. Update. I walked the land this morning with my dad and daughter. My dad said the noises could have been a fox and the smell a bear. We have black bear out here. But even at the dump, those bears don't smell the way that I smelled last night. We also found no traces of animal activity. I took pictures of the landscape that I'll post later. Thank you all for your comments and suggestions. My boyfriend and I were staying in a tiny home in Navajo Nation right across from Monument Alley in 2019 that was solar powered. It was one of the last stops on a road through Colorado and Utah. There was only a shared outhouse for a bathroom that you had access to by going outside. The area is vast, beautiful, and feels somewhat desolate because of the lack of fertile earth. To set the scene, the tiny home is on a cliffside with a spreading view of all of Monument Valley. Behind it are large red rock formations with hiking trails. There are a few homes around, but very spread apart. It has a strong energy about it, and there were petroglyphs on some of the rock formations around the tiny home. We arrived in the early afternoon and settled in. As night was falling, my boyfriend called to his dad to let him know that we had arrived safely and to tell him where we were. His dad has had some experience in Navajo Nation, as he's come to the area before to do a sweet tent ceremony, and he told us that he always felt off there. He then told us to watch out for Skinwalkers, and we had both not heard of them before, so we giggled to ourselves about him being fearful over something unreal. We get off the phone, and my boyfriend started Googling. After a few minutes, he looked over at me and said, well, the worst thing that happens is we die. And at that moment, all of the power in the cabin went out. Completely. It was totally dark, and this tiny home had huge glass windows bordering the whole interior. We were scared to death, and of course, the only way to use the restroom was to go outside. We both slept poorly that night. Thankfully, nothing happened from there. However, the next morning I woke up to a pack of feral horses standing right outside of our window, and one was staring into my soul. I went outside to take photos, and I felt like it was trying to lead me away back to the large red rocks. It truly felt like the energy of the area was reminding us it was there, especially when we scoffed at it. Overall, a really cool experience, albeit a bit humbling and scary. Thank you so much for listening to all of the stories in this video. I hope you enjoyed them. I also hope that you enjoy the extra rain at the end. Get a great night's sleep, everyone, and I'll read to you in the next video. Bye-bye now.